Frank Norris is known for being an influential progressive journalist and writer during the Progressive Era. His writings brought forward the reality of the working American during the Gilded Age, showcasing the hardships and injustices of the era. Frank Norris was born in Chicago, Illinois in 1870. In 1884, the Norris family moved to San Francisco on the West Coast. He later went to London with his family at the age of 17. After that, he learned to paint at the Académie Julian in Paris. While enrolled in the Academy in Paris, Frank learned about traditional naturalist beliefs. These ideas helped him form some progressive viewpoints for issues near the turn of the century. Later, Frank would study at the University of California, Berkeley, which further influenced his feelings towards naturalist issues. After California, Frank went to Harvard, where he grew more talented at writing and journalism. Norris's writing grew with the help of Louis E. Gates during his time at Harvard. Frank's early exposure to naturalist ideals would leave him with a blueprint for his own famous works later in life. After his education, Norris would join with many news, magazine, and publishing firms during his career, from working as a news correspondent in South Africa to working for Doubleday and Page. After his experience in writing for magazines and papers, Norris would take on his own personal works, the work that he is known for today. After the Civil War and Reconstruction, the economy sought to recover some of its lost time. As Gilded Age monopolies came to be the driving force of the economies in the late 1800s, Norris began to use his writing to show the American people how these economic changes were affecting them. The age of big business and corporations led to an increasingly unfair work environment allowed by the government policy of the Gilded Age, referred to as laissez-faire economics. This meant that the U.S. government had adopted a hands-off approach to the economy during its time of rapid growth during the late 1800s. While the Gilded Age was a very economically successful time for America, there were key glaring issues. Norris wrote two popular progressive-focused novels, The Octopus and The Pit. These novels were intended for their readers to look at the state of America and see the overwhelming power of monopolies during the turn of the century. The novels would encourage Americans to see the true state of the country and to question it if their freedoms were being upheld by the government. When more and more lower and middle-class citizens began to answer no, there was a radical change, largely backed by a movement called the Progressive Movement. The Progressives focused on trying to change the governmental stance on the economy of the Gilded Age, ultimately becoming convincing enough to warrant the passage of the antitrust acts, such as the Sherman Antitrust Act, which limited powers of the monopolies. Norris's works, including The Octopus and The Pit, helped spread and popularize the ideals of the progressive movement. Eventually, pushes for the progressive changes to the American economy helped lead to present-day social, political, and economic climate. If progressive ideals had not been realized and spread, it is uncertain that many of the union and workplace freedoms that were won by the progressives would be present today. The shape of America would have been very different if the Gilded Age had continued any longer than it had. The Gilded Age was a time of development for America, including a critical stage of development for its social structure after the end of the Civil War and Reconstruction. Without the progressives stepping in to change the current trends of the Gilded Age, it is unknown what the U.S. could have looked like as a result of this altered history. Working-class Americans could be subject to an unbalanced regulation and policy for several more decades if the progressive ideals had not been spread and adopted as quickly as they were. Frank Norris can be seen as a key contributor to this quick spread, using his books to tell the story of the Gilded Age Americans against the monopolies. The lead progressives inspired many to change their own future, one that seemed in dire need of saving. Expensive rent and low working wages were enough incentive for Americans to change their lives for the better. In effect, largely limiting the power of trusts such as Rockefeller Standard Oil Trust or the U.S. Steel Trust. By the 1900s, the government had sensed the people's need for change. President William McKinley promised that a process of trust busting was underway, leading to the breakdown and separation of powerful monopolies. This led to a more balanced economy, where small businesses could grow without fear of being overtaken by a megacorporation. The outcome of the Gilded Age was an important turning point in U.S. history, and Frank Norris was arguably one of the most important key components of the radical change that had occurred.